That's horrible. Oh, that's the worst sound in the world. Oh, wake up. Maybe that's your alarm. Oh, let me get woke up here. Well, that nap was over. Boy, don't you hate that alarm? It's so annoying and horrible, isn't it? Wake up. Maybe that's your alarm on your phone. Or maybe you have something better. I don't know. Here's what I found, just to let you guys know. Let me play it again for you. This is what I like. You ready? I changed the alarm on my phone. I would always wake up to that alarm, that horrible thing you just heard. And I'd wake up in a bad mood and I'd be mad. But this is what I changed it to. And it makes my whole life a whole lot easier. I changed it to the harp setting. I think you guys should do that. If you change it to this harp setting, you'll wake up in a much better mood. You'll be smiling. It's a lot better than that horrible alarm that goes like this. Wake up. Time to get up. Well, welcome. Boy, that nap time was over. It's time to wake up and get to our notes. But the notes this time are about the Great Awakening. And the Great Awakening was a religious movement that swept through the colonies in the 1700s, the 1730s. But I think there's going to be a second Great Awakening in this country, and that's when all the schools get back to 5 days a week, all the students, every day, because y'all been sleeping in. Y'all haven't been waking up. And I think that the second Great Awakening is going to happen when they get all the students back in school, and that horrible alarm is going to go off, and it's going to go. And you're going to have to wake up and get back to school. But we'll save that for another day. Let's talk about the Great Awakening religious movement in the colonies in the 1700s. So get out your notebook. To activate your brain, of course, I drew an alarm clock with that horrible sound. But the Great Awakening was a religious movement. And one of the famous people from that Great Awakening was a traveling preacher named Jonathan Edwards. And he wrote a very famous sermon that's a famous part of our it's a famous part of our Puritan heritage. But this sermon was called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And in that message, Jonathan Edwards, he wanted all of the colonists, the English colonists, to wake up. Wake up, get back to your faith. Wake up. And he used this really cool mental image that we were all, as human beings, dangling by a little thread, dangling over a pit of fire. And it was time to wake up and get back to your faith. And that's the image he used for, oh my gosh, I think I burnt that. Oh no. I hope the daggone fire alarms don't go off. Let's check the sprinklers. Okay, I think we're good. About burned down the school. Can you imagine tomorrow, teacher fired for burning down the school? Wait, I hear Mr. Crouch out in the hallway. I hear the clippity-clop of his shoes. Maybe he smells something. Okay, he went away. We're good. Whew, sorry about that. But the mental image that we are all dangling over that pit of fire was the mental image that Jonathan Edwards used, and he wanted us to wake up. Wake up and get back to our faith. He wanted it to be more he wanted us to, he wanted the colonists to wake up and get back to their faith in God, and that was part of this religious movement that swept through the colonies in the 1700s. Well, now that I've almost burnt down the school, let's go burn up a few notes. Yeah. Oh my gosh. These videos are all unedited and off the cuff, by the way, in case you haven't noticed. I don't edit them. Maybe I should go back and edit all that stuff out. All right, so our lesson 4 here starts with EQ number 8. What was the message of the Great Awakening? And it's pretty simple. The message of the Great Awakening, this religious movement, was to wake up and get back to your faith. All of the English colonists, wake up, English colonists, get back to your faith. Remember, many of the English colonists many of the English colonies were founded for religious reasons. The Pilgrims, the Puritan colony in Massachusetts, Maryland founded for Catholics, Pennsylvania founded for Quakers. So many of the colonies in the New World were founded for religious purposes. So after they've been there for 100 years, it was time. This religious movement swept through these colonies. It was time to wake up and get back to your faith. Get back to the reason why, your ancestors came over here. Now remember, you can pause this screen, but the message of the Great Awakening, wake up, get back to your faith. EQ number 9, how did the Great Awakening affect religion in the colonies? Well, there's a few bullets here to write. So you can pause that, copy that down, and then I'm going to explain that. I have this deep innate desire to explain things to you. I don't know why that is, but one of these days, I'm just going to put all the notes on the board and say, copy them down, and I'm going to read the sports in the newspaper. I can't do that. It's not me. But let's talk about the EQ number 9. Well, the first bullet on there was, obviously, the Great Awakening worked. I mean, if you were told to wake up and get back to your faith, you're dangling over a pit of fire, nothing's going to save you but the good Lord himself. I mean, that's going to be scary enough to wake you up a little bit and get you back to your faith and back to your roots, back to where you're grounded. So the number 1 bullet on there was it worked. Church membership in the colonies increased during the Great Awakening, went up. People started to come back and get back to their faith, and it worked. The second bullet, though, kind of goes hand in hand with that, because as churches grew, more and more people, the churches became divided a little bit, because on one side you had the old lights. These were the people who were built in tradition, people that were not open to change, did not want change. And then you had the other group of people called the new lights. They were open to new ideas, open to change. The old lights were traditionally more of your older people. The new lights were traditionally more the younger people. The older people, of course, didn't want change. They were, we've done things this way for 282 years. Why do we need to change now? And of course, the new lights are people who are like, let's try something different. Let's do this. Maybe your church is a little bit like that even today. I don't know. But church membership grew in the Great Awakening, and churches became divided between the old lights and the new lights. So now let's go to the last essential question. What was the message of the Great Awakening? Wake up. Get back to your faith. How did it change? Church membership grew. It worked. But churches became divided between old lights and new lights. And EQ number 10 says, okay, how did the Great Awakening affect the colonies? And there's 1, 2, 3, 4 bullets for you to write down there. Go ahead and pause it. Okay, we're back. The first thing about the Great Awakening, and I want you to notice, right here on your notes, hopefully you understand that GA means Great Awakening, not Good Morning America. I was just abbreviating. But the first thing the Great Awakening affected in the colonies, and this is kind of important, because the Great Awakening reached all races of people, all social classes. Now let me explain. It didn't matter if you were a colonist living on the frontier with your wife and your kids. It didn't matter if you were a Native American Indian. It didn't matter if you were a slave working on the plantation farms in the South. It didn't matter if you were the colonial governor. It didn't matter if you were the king, because guess what? All of you were dangling over that pit of fire. That's right. Even the king was dangling over that pit of fire, and he needed to wake up and get back to his faith. The colonial governor, oh, that's right, you're hanging over that pit of fire. Oh, the colonists, you're hanging over a pit of fire. People working on the plantation farms, you're hanging up. Native Americans, all people. It didn't matter. It leveled the playing field a little bit. It didn't matter if you were a king, didn't matter if you were a governor or a colonist, it didn't matter who you were. You better wake up and get back to your faith. I have to play that sound one more time. Awful. The Great Awakening reached everyone, and everyone had to make that decision to wake up and get back to their faith, no matter who you were. The other bullet talks about women. During childbirth, many women at this time during the Great Awakening did turn back to their faith. And let me explain. In the 1700s, you didn't have technology, medicine, the knowledge that we have today. And in fact, colonial women sometimes had difficulty during childbirth, and the young baby would either die during childbirth or the mother herself, or sadly, maybe both. So when colonial women were facing childbirth, as childbirth got nearer and nearer, they turned back to their faith. I mean, anybody would. When you're facing something as traumatic as that, you're going to wake up and get back to your faith, and many women did that during childbirth. The other bullet was how the Great Awakening did improve communication between the colonies. Now, you got to remember, the colonists at this time in the 1700s couldn't click my link and watch this video. They couldn't watch a church service online on Facebook Live, which many churches are doing right now during the pandemic. They couldn't shoot each other text or call each other, obviously, or an email. They didn't have any of that. But what happened was, as preachers like Jonathan Edwards and many others traveled throughout the colonies to preach this message about waking up and getting back to your faith, they also took information from one colony to the other. They took letters from one colony to the other, and it just improved communication because people always wanted to know. In New York, they wanted to know what was going on in the Pennsylvania colony. People in Virginia wanted to know what was going on in New York. And traveling preachers helped carry this information back and forth as they traveled around and preached the messages during the Great Awakening. And lastly, the Great Awakening affected the colonies because it goes back to that first bullet a little bit. Because all people were dangling over that pit of fire, that I almost burnt this piece of paper and burnt down the school. Look, I burned it, caught him on fire. It leveled everyone, and it kind of put everyone on an equal plane. Even the king was dangling over that pit of fire and needed to wake up and get back to his faith. And what this did was this allowed the colonists to really question authority a little bit. Who does the king think he is? He's just like me. He's dangling over a pit of fire too. He's no better than I am. And colonies began to question authority. And this is just another piece of that huge snowball with unfair taxes, taxation without representation. It's going to just keep growing and growing until this explodes into a war, which we're going to learn about in the next unit. Now, we only have 3 vocabulary words. Let's talk about them. The first one, revivals. They're still kind of part of our culture even today. There are several things from colonial times that we still have ingrained into our culture today, like town meetings, which, town council, even Anstead has a town council, and they have council meetings, started in the colonial days. But revivals were emotional church gatherings during the Great Awakening. And you know, it's something that's even been handed down through our culture even today. There are revivals, and many of you have been to some. Some of you may have not been. But they're emotional church gatherings. Now, the important guy right here, Jonathan Edwards, famous preacher during the Great Awakening, and he wrote this very famous sermon, piece of Puritan literature that has been handed down through generations. It's called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Now, Jonathan Edwards traveled and delivered that sermon and used that mental image right here. You know, we're all dangling over that pit of fire. And in fact, in lesson 4, I have an assignment where I have uploaded a copy of this famous sermon, and you have to read it and answer a few questions from it. And it's not that hard. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, oh my gosh, a long-winded sermon. Well, Jonathan Edwards, you know, the sermon is short. He wasn't real long-winded like Mr. Pack. Just picking on you, Mr. Pack. Mr. Pack actually is great with his sermons because he uses mental imagery. He activates our brain like Jonathan Edwards did. He does the same kind of thing. And it gets you thinking, gets your mind going. So Mr. Pack does the same thing. But this sermon from Jonathan Edwards is actually about 3 or 4 paragraphs long. It's not very long. And you're going to read that and answer some questions in an assignment later. But that's in the folder. I'll talk about that more in a minute. But Jonathan Edwards, famous preacher during the Great Awakening. And his sermon, of course, was Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, which used that great mental image that we're dangling over that pit of fire that I about started here in the school. Oh, gosh. Okay. The last one is the Great Awakening itself. You can look up a definition online if you want to, but you know what? I'd like to make definitions working definitions that are easy to remember. But the Great Awakening, time period of religious revival in the colonies during the 1730s. Wake up. Get back to your faith. So that concludes all of our notes for Unit 3. Hope you've been taking good ones. Now remember, there's going to be a couple of things for you to do in this lesson, lesson 4 of Unit 3. Number 1, watch this video, which you're doing right now, and take notes. Number 2, don't tell no one I about burnt down the school. Number 3, in that lesson 4 folder is the Jonathan Edwards worksheet assignment, where you read through his famous sermon and answer 3 short questions. Then the 4th question on there, now pay attention because when you get in there, I'll have more instructions for it, but the 4th question says for you to draw a picture of that image that Jonathan Edwards used, okay? Draw a picture of this image. All right. Now, I know some of you are not artists, and that's fine, and some of you don't have crayons or anything at home, but you'll still get all the points for it, no matter if it's just a pencil drawing of stick people, but however you envision that in your mind. But you can still get credit for it. But the ones who do exceptional on this picture, the ones who draw an amazing picture, because some of you are really talented artists, I'm going to print those and put them on the wall of our classroom. And I'm also going to give you some extra team points for some of the ones that are better. And maybe even a few bonus points for you. So the ones that are just really super cool, I'm going to give you some extra team points in our team competition, and I'll give you a few bonus points too. So, number 1, watch this video, which you are. Don't tell nobody I burnt down the school almost. Number 3, do the Jonathan Edwards worksheet assignment. Number 4 is the Unit 3 study guide, which goes back to the beginning of the unit, the colonial government, chain of command, the king, the privy council. It goes through the colonial economies. It goes through the navigation acts and how the colonists hated that stupid law, and it upset them because the colonies could only trade with, and imports to the colonies were, you remember that from class, the colonies could only trade with England, imports to the colonies were taxed. This was very unfair, and of course the study guide will include questions about the Great Awakening. Wake up, get back to your faith. And then lastly in the lesson 4 folder is the Unit 3 test, which you can take online there and submit. So those are the things you got to do. But there's one more thing. I want all of you to change your alarm from this, Wake up, Madison Campbell. Get out of bed. Change it from that to this. And if you try that out, you will wake up in a better mood with a smile on your face. And when I see you at school and you're smiling, I'll know that you changed your alarm to the harp sound like I did. It made a big difference for me. So until I see you at school with that smile on your face, play the harp. Wake up. Come back to school. And I'll see you then.